Does your Airtable base feel clunky? Everything takes longer than it should. It's beginning to feel like way more work than it's actually worth. You may be making one of these 5 mistakes. Let's go through them. Check it out. Welcome back. I'm Zack from InnerDev Solutions. We help businesses streamline their processes using custom no-code tools so you can focus on what matters most. To learn more, you can visit our website, innerdevsolutions.com, or use the link in the description below. In this video, we'll go through 5 common mistakes that I often see that impedes the development and use of an Airtable base and solution. The 5 mistakes we'll be discussing today: not planning the data structure, using single select fields instead of linked records, over-reliance on a single table, neglecting automations, and ignoring formula fields and rollups. I'll go through each of these in more detail, starting with number 1, not planning the data structure. One of the biggest mistakes is not planning out the data structure. At the very least, you just need to spend a few minutes, even if it's a really simple outline to start. Often what I like to do is I like to understand the full workflow. So map that out. You can use a piece of paper. You can do it in a software application like Miro, the whiteboard, whatever is best for you. Best thing to do is map out the workflow in the process. What that means is, let's say we're building some sort of really simple invoicing tracking tool. What we're probably going to have is a customer that requests to purchase something from us. And then from there, we should track customer and the customer related information and then create the invoice. Step 1, customer reaches out to us, and that's where we could plan out our workflow. In this case, it's going to look like this. Customer reaches out, we'll create a customer record, create invoice, and then send invoice. Now, most businesses are going to have many different workflows and a more in-depth workflow that they have to go through, but this gives you the simple idea. Then from here, we can plan out the data structure. Again, you can use any of the tools that I mentioned before, paper, a Miro board, or a whiteboard, something like that. But this is where we want to outline the actual data structure and all of the tables that are going to be required to build out our system. In this example right here, we would need a customer table. And the best way to think about this is groups or collections of information based off of our workflow. What types of information do we need to track? So as I said, we need to get customer details. We need to track invoicing. And with an invoice, the other piece of this is you have the invoice and then you have the line items that are on the invoice. So that will actually be 2 separate tables. So once we have this laid out, we can go through and make a list of all of the fields or columns that are going to be required in each given table. I'm not going to get into that in this video. I think it's pretty straightforward at this point, but obviously with a customer, you need a customer name, billing email, billing address, maybe a phone number, contact name. Those are the obvious pieces of information. You can add in really anything that you want that's related to the customer. Invoice, you're going to have an invoice number, probably an invoice date, the line items, which are going to be linked to it. You're going to have a total amount, status for if it's been paid, sent, so on, and probably a number of other items or fields that need to be assigned to the invoice. And then at the line item, you're going to have a product description, product ID, quantity, the amount, the unit price. You're going to generate a bunch of different information on each line item that's linked to the actual invoice. Once you've listed out all of this information, you'll be able to create something that looks like this. So this is what the data schema will look like. Again, this one is really simple. We just have the contacts, customer, and addresses, and how it all relates to each other. So contact relates to a customer, and an address or multiple addresses relate to the customer as well. Mistake number 2 that I see quite often is using single select fields when you should be using a linked record. So similar to the previous mistake, we're going to have multiple tables of data. So customers, invoices, and line items. What I've happened to see quite often is, let's assume this is our invoices table, and our invoices table should link to a customer table. What I've seen quite often is this would be the company, and the user would come in here and assign a company to a select field. In this case, if you're creating an invoice, instead of it linking to an additional table and record, they're just going to come in here and select the customer from this dropdown. When you structure things this way, it makes filtering and reporting and rollups a lot more difficult. For example, if you want to see how much that customer has spent with you over their lifetime of the business with you, then it's going to be a lot more difficult or time consuming to get this information rather than just going to the customer record and seeing a rollup of all of the invoices they've had with you over time. And the way you can fix that is instead of having the single select field, you'd have another table called customers. And then on the invoices, would do a link to another record, link to the customer, and we'll create the field. And we could come in here. We'll just assume this is invoice 1, and you'd be able to select the customer that this record was linked to. And then at this point in the customers, you would be able to do more reporting based off of all of the invoices that are linked to that specific customer. Mistake number 3 is over-reliance on a single table. Now, this relates to both of the previous mistakes as well, where users are more familiar with Excel or Google Sheets. They generally put a lot of different information in just one table rather than breaking it out, as I've just been explaining here, as invoices, line items, and a customers table, or whatever your workflow is. So maybe it's project management. And again, you need to track clients or customers. You need to track projects. And then within each project, you're going to have a task or multiple different tasks that need to link back to that project. So something I've seen quite often is using one table, but that is not the right idea for a relational database or a tool like Airtable. The other thing that I often see is instead of creating just one task table and then relating each task to a project, you would have a task table for each project. For example, they would come in here, have task for this project 1, and then they'd have another task table for project 2. And in Google Sheets or in Excel, if you were tracking projects, it might make sense to track them this way. But in Airtable or any other relational database, it doesn't make sense to do that. You'd want to have your projects table, and then you'd want to have your task table, and then each task could relate back to the specified project. Mistake number 4, something I often see for new users is neglecting automations because they're just not comfortable with setting them up and they do not see how that they can get an advantage from using them. Automations is a little bit more advanced and it can get trickier to work with, but even getting started, it is not that difficult to create some simple automations that will save you time. Now, this is a really simple one, but something that could be useful is if an invoice has been paid, hopefully further down the road, you can set it up so that this is all automated. But if you're still coming into the base to mark that an invoice was paid, you come in here and change the status to paid. Now, quite often what people will do is come over here and select the date that it was paid as well. But a simple automation that you can create, just click the automations tab at the top. We can add a trigger. And there's a lot of different triggers available. One of the most important ones to get familiar with is when a record matches conditions. So we'll select that, we'll select our invoices table, and we'll add a condition. And in this case, we just want to say when the status is paid, select a record as a test record, which is invoice 1. The next step is just going to be update a record in the invoices, which is the exact same table. The record ID that we want to update is the one that we selected here, the Airtable record ID, and the field we want to update is the date paid. We can pass in today's date based off of the runtime. I'll just go back into data. You can see I've marked it as paid. I'll flip back into automations. We'll test this automation and we will run the automation. Looks like it was successful. I'll click into data and we can see that it has now entered today's date. Now, anytime that you come into an invoice, mark it as paid, that can be done, and the date paid will automatically get input. Automations can be really useful for reminders as well. There's lots of ways to use automations to your advantage. And for mistake number 5, one thing that I often see is ignoring formulas and rollups Specifically, I'm going to show you the roll-up one. This is one that I have seen people get confused with in the past when they're starting out. As I mentioned, in this case, let's say we have a invoice amount here. This mistake relates to some of the other mistakes that I previously mentioned. In this case here, we have a customer that's linked to this invoice. And now if I bring in an amount field, in this case, I'll just use a currency field and manually input it. But if this was $500, and I will just duplicate this, that we've used a linked record field here for the customer. And let's say this one was $1,500. It's going to be a lot easier to roll up the totals linked to this customer. If we come into customers, I'll go down, create a new field, type in rollup. Now the select rollup source, we're going to look at the invoices that it is linked to, and we're going to get the amount here. It's going to automatically add in a function for us, which is just summing all of the values, and we'll create this field. Now we can see that there's $2,000 related to these invoices. So in invoices, if we've got customer 2, if I create a new invoice, we'll select customer 2 here and say that it was $2,500. We'll go back into customers. We can see that they have paid or spent $2,500 with us. And across 2 different invoices, this customer has spent $2,000 with us. These aren't just little tweaks. These are the differences from a base that feels like a spreadsheet to a base that feels like a app that actually saves you time and solves a lot of your problems. Again, it's important to plan your structure, link, don't list, break up your base into multiple tables, make the routine tasks, and let formulas do the math for you. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for more videos in the future.